The sun was just rising over Tofa village, casting a warm golden hue over the red clay huts as the roosters crowed and women began sweeping the courtyards with handmade brooms made of palm fronds. The aroma of burning firewood filled the air, mixed with the sweet scent of akamu and fried akara balls. In the center of it all, a 10-year-old boy named Obinna ran barefoot through the dusty path, chasing his younger sister, Amaka, who held a stick pretending it was a sword. "Give me back my chalk, Amaka," he shouted, laughing. "You'll have to catch me first, teacher boy," she called back. Obinna was known in the village as Nwata Onye Nkuzi, the teacher's child, because his father, Papa Uchenna, was the only educated man in the village, a former missionary school teacher who now taught the children in a wooden schoolhouse beside the church. Tofa was a small, close-knit Igbo village nestled between farmlands and shallow rivers. Where children learned to fish with baskets, elders sat under the big ukwa tree telling tales of the ancestors, and everyone gathered in the evenings for folk songs and stories. Though they had little, they had peace, and peace to them was everything. Obinna loved books. Every evening after dinner he sat on the floor beside the oil lamp and read whatever Papa Uchenna gave him, old missionary English readers, copies of the Bible, or pages from torn government pamphlets. His favorite story was about a boy named Julius who traveled to England and became a lawyer. "One day," Obinna would whisper to himself, "I too will wear shoes and stand in a place where snow falls from the sky." His mother, Mama Ijoma, was the gentlest woman in Tofa. She braided girls' hair for free and made the best ugba and yam in the entire village. Her voice was like music, and Obinna always said that when she sang, even the wind stood still, to listen. But by mid-1966, the air in Tofa had begun to change. Rumors drifted in like bad smoke from the north. Whispers of killings, of trains arriving with dead bodies, of homes burned and businesses looted. Men who had left for Kano and Kaduna returned home with eyes hollow like clay pots. "They are killing us," whispered Uncle Ejike, who had returned with only one arm. "They dragged my wife before me, slit her throat like goat for Sala." Obinna listened from the corner of the room. He had never seen grown men weep like that before. And that night, for the first time, he had a nightmare. Not of monsters, but of fire, blood, and the sound of children screaming. One morning, Papa Uchenna returned from the district meeting, his face pale with worry. He called Mama into their small bedroom and closed the bamboo curtain behind them. But Obinna, ever the curious one, sat by the door and listened. "They say the East wants to secede. Odumegwu Ojukwu has declared Biafra," his father said in a whisper. "The North has already begun moving soldiers. They are sending aircraft. We have to prepare." "Prepare?" Mama asked, her voice trembling. "For war." That night, Tofa changed. The men of the village held emergency meetings. Women began to dry more cassava and plant extra yam. The laughter of children faded. Even the Ikwe drums beat differently, lower, heavier, like a warning from the ancestors. School stopped without notice. The church bell no longer rang. The roads leading out of the village were blocked by makeshift checkpoints. Even the postmen stopped coming. One day, Obinna saw a lorry arrive from Nsukka. Inside were women and children, some bleeding, some wailing, some silent as stone. The lorry was filled not with goods, but with terror. Obinna looked into the eyes of a boy his age who held a bloodied rag over his arm. The boy said nothing. His silence screamed louder than 1,000 war cries. Papa Uchenna brought home a battery-powered radio, one of the few in the village. He placed it in the center of the room and gathered the family around. The voice on the radio spoke English with urgency. "The Republic of Biafra has been declared under the leadership of Colonel Odumegwu Ojukwu. We will not bow to the tyranny of the Nigerian government. This is the voice of Biafra." Mama gasped. "War has come to our doorstep. That night, Obinna lay beside his sister under the raffia mat roof, but sleep would not come. The wind whispered through the trees outside, but to him it sounded like voices crying. He looked at the stars and wondered, what happens to boys like me when war comes? Do we get to grow old? Do we still dream? 2 days later, Papa called the children and knelt beside them. You must be brave, he said, and you must remember who you are. War is not a thing for children, but it comes whether we want it or not. Obinna clung to his father's knees. Papa, will we be safe? His father did not answer. Instead, he pulled something from his pocket, a small notebook with pages yellowed by time. Write your story, Obinna, even if your voice shakes, even if you must write with tears. And that was the day Obinna began to write. The day before, the first bomb fell. The day before his village was swallowed by the firestorm that would change his life forever. The morning of the attack began like any other. A humid silence hovered over Tofa village, broken only by the distant chirping of cicadas and the occasional cough from an old man across the compound. But beneath the calm lay something strange, a stillness too perfect, too clean. Obinna awoke, to the scent of roasted yam, but heard none of the usual morning chatter. No goats bleated, no roosters crowed. Even the village madman, and Keem the drifter, was not singing his usual nonsense. "Mama?" he asked, stepping outside barefoot. "Where is everyone?" His mother was standing at the edge of the compound, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, eyes fixed on the sky. Papa Uchenna had already gone out with the other men to build trenches behind the church. Obinna looked up too. That's when he saw it, a black dot in the sky, then another, and another. Planes, Mama whispered more to herself than anyone else. At first there was no sound, just the distant humming of engines. Then, all at once, the world changed. Boom! The sound was like the wrath of the gods, tearing through the air and shaking the ground. Birds flew from trees in every direction. Obinna dropped to his knees, his ears ringing. Then came the screaming. Smoke rose from the western side of the village. One of the planes had dropped a bomb near the yam barns, and fire was spreading fast. "Mama!" cried Amaka, running out. From behind the hut. "Lie down," Mama yelled, grabbing both children and shoving them under a broken wooden table. Obinna clutched his sister tightly, both of them trembling like leaves in the Harmattan wind. Another explosion hit the riverbank. The water sprayed into the air as if the earth itself had burst open. The air was thick with dust, smoke, and the coppery scent of blood. Obinna covered his ears, but the sound was inside him now, a deep, vibrating thunder that seemed to be tearing his soul apart. When the planes finally disappeared into the sky like evil spirits satisfied with destruction, the villagers emerged slowly, some crawling, some dragging their loved ones, some crying out names into the emptiness. Obinna held his sister's hand and stepped out. He would never forget what he saw. Huts were flattened. A child, no older than 6, lay face down beside a banana tree, unmoving. A woman stumbled by, her wrapper soaked in red, cradling the limp body of a baby. The church bell tower was gone, reduced to splinters. And the schoolhouse where Papa Uchenna taught? Nothing but smoke. Obinna's legs buckled. "Papa," he said. They ran. They ran past the old well, past the burnt-out cassava store, past the remains of Uncle Ajik's bicycle. They ran to the church grounds, and there, in a pool of dust and soot, they found him. Papa Uchenna was alive, but only barely. He was pinned under a collapsed beam, his leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Blood trickled down the side of his face. His hands were burnt, and yet he smiled when he saw them. "You're safe," he whispered. Mama fell to her knees. "We must get him out." Villagers came running with spades and machetes, using every muscle to lift the beam. Obinna stood frozen, unsure whether he was dreaming or inside one of those books where tragedies happen to other people. But this was real. With great effort, they freed Papa and carried him to the health hut, a thatch-covered room with only herbs, warm water, and the prayers of Mama Chinedu, the village healer. He was conscious, but barely. Obinna sat by his father's side the entire night, wiping his forehead with cold cloth. Mama did not cry, not once, but her silence was heavier than any scream. 2 days later, Papa's fever grew worse. There was no penicillin, no doctor, just leaves and love. He called Obinna closer. "Remember the notebook," he said weakly. "Write. No matter what they burn, they can't burn your words. Papa, please, don't leave us," Obinna wept. "My boy, in every war, a story survives. Let yours be one of them." And with that, Papa Uchenna, the teacher, the father, the light of Tofa, exhaled for the last time. They buried him behind the church ruins, using a broken blackboard as a headstone. Obinna placed his father's worn pen beside the grave. That night, the boy who once dreamed of snow and stories sat alone under the moonlight, staring at his ink-stained fingers. He didn't cry, not because he didn't want to, but because the fire inside him had already turned his tears into smoke. The sun that rose over Tofa village the next morning didn't bring hope. It brought silence, the kind of silence that speaks of death, kind that lives in the ruins of churches, the kind that chokes your throat like smoke that won't leave. Obinna sat on the steps of what used to be his school, now nothing but ash and red earth. His mother, Mama Ebele, stood nearby, wrapping their few remaining items into a piece of cloth: a small Bible, a wooden spoon, a half-full bottle of palm oil, and Papa Uchenna's torn notebook. Behind them, Amaka clung to Obinna's hand. She hadn't spoken in over a day. Her big eyes had seen too much, and her little heart had folded into silence. "Obinna," Mama said softly, "we can't stay." He looked up. "Where will we go?" "To find food, shelter, peace. We're refugees, now." The word hit him like a slap. Refugee, a person who has nowhere, a ghost that walks but belongs to no land. The next morning, a group of women and children, about 20 of them, gathered at the broken mango tree near the church. The village men were either dead, fighting, or missing. Only one young man, Ifeanyi, agreed to lead them. With a long stick in hand and a torn piece of cloth tied around his head, he pointed toward the thick forest. "We follow the path west, cross the river, reach Nenewi. There's a Biafran camp there." No one asked questions. They simply began to walk. Obinna carried his sister on his back. Her arms were thin as broomsticks, and she shivered each time the wind rustled the trees. Mama Ebele walked beside him barefoot, her feet bleeding, but her face stone-hard with resolve. By the third day, the children began to collapse. One girl, Ngozi, barely 5 years old, fainted from hunger. Her mother had nothing left to give. Not even breast milk, just empty arms and dry songs. They boiled cassava leaves once, ate palm kernels. One boy chewed on tree bark until his mouth bled. "Obinna," Amaka whispered one night, "when will we eat again?" He didn't knee. He hated that he didn't know, and he hated the war, not the soldiers, not the rebels, but the war itself. The cruel, invisible beast that had swallowed his home, his father, his meals, his books, and now, his sister's laughter. They reached the Idemili River on the 5th day. The water shimmered with moonlight, beautiful and terrible. On the other side, they could see smoke rising gently, a sign of life. But the river wasn't kind. As they crossed using a fallen tree, 2 children slipped into the water. Their mothers screamed, diving in. Only one child was pulled out. The other was claimed by the current. Mama Ebeli held Amaka so tight the girl whimpered. Obinna clenched his fists and muttered something under his breath. "What did you say, my son?" Mama asked. "I said if there's a God watching this, he should be crying too." Mama didn't reply, but later that night she held his hand in the dark as if to say, "I'm still here, for now." By the time they limped into Niue, it had begun to rain. The refugee camp was not what Obinna had imagined. There were no clean beds, no waiting doctors, no warm food, just endless rows of bamboo huts, sick people wrapped in rags and the constant smell of smoke, sweat, and sickness. But they were alive. A young Biafran volunteer, barely older than Obinna, gave them a corner of a shared tent. He handed them a single yam and some water. Obinna took the food, but didn't eat. He was no longer a child. Children dream. Children laugh. Children cry. But Obinna had stopped doing all three. He spent the next days watching, listening, waiting. Each night, more people arrived. More stories of burnt villages, missing fathers, stolen daughters, starving babies, and each morning, fewer people woke up. One evening, a thin boy named Chijioke sat beside him. He had once been a schoolboy, too. They shared stories of teachers and poems and how it felt to hold a pen that still had ink. "What do you want to be?" Chijioke asked. Obinna replied without thinking. "A writer." Chijioke smiled sadly. "Then write about this." "Who will read it?" "One day, when the world grows ears again, they'll need to know what we lived through." That night, Obinna borrowed charcoal from the kitchen tent and began writing on the back of dried cassava leaves. He wrote about Papa, about the sky that caught fire, about Ngozi and the river, about hunger, about silence, about hope. And in every sentence, he planted a seed of memory, a seed that war could not burn. The Biafran camp in Niue had no fences, no flags, no formality, just a forest of the forgotten. Children wandered barefoot between tents like ghosts in oversized shirts. Women clutched soup pots with nothing to cook. And every day, someone wrapped a lifeless body in raffia mats, dug shallow graves behind the hills, and prayed with dry lips. Obinna had lived many lives in one body. The life of a schoolboy. The life of a son. The life of a brother. Now he was a chronicler of pain. In the corner of their shared tent, Obinna bent over his makeshift journal, cassava leaf pages held together with palm twine. With each stroke of charcoal, he bled stories. He wrote about his village, about Amaka's laughter, about Mama's prayers. He wrote about how hunger makes children eat clay. How war doesn't shout. It whispers in bellies and in blood. How silence is the loudest scream in a refugee camp. But one morning, his notebook was gone. Panic lit his chest like a bushfire. He turned over their sleeping mats, searched under cooking pots, even asked a blind old man if he'd seen it. "No one touches your stories, Obinna," the man rasped, "except the ones who want to silence them." And that was when he noticed him, Corporal Madu, a young Biafran soldier reading the notebook under the mango tree, his rifle resting beside him. Obinna marched up, heart pounding like a djembe. "Drum. That's mine," he said. The soldier didn't look up. "You write well." Obinna clenched his fists. "Give it back." Madu smiled. Why waste talent on cassava leaves? He handed the notebook back, then paused. "Do you want to die here writing stories, or use your hands to shape the war?" Obinna didn't reply, but his silence was a spark. The next day, Madu returned, this time with a boy barely older than Obinna, holding a wooden rifle. "We train in the hills. Come." Obinna hesitated. Mama was inside the tent, coughing blood into a rag. Amaka sat beside her, combing her hair with a broken toothbrush. She looked up. "Where are you going, Obinna?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. He followed Madhu past the tents, up a narrow forest trail. There, under the open sky, he saw them. A battalion of barefoot boys learning to shoot. Some had never held pencils, but they held rifles. Some had never. Chased chickens, but they chased bullets. Obinna picked up a wooden model. His arms trembled, his heart screamed, but his face stayed still. Madhu leaned in. "This is how we win, by becoming fire before the world burns us alive." Obinna pulled the trigger. Click. He hated the sound. Days turned to weeks. Obinna trained in secret, hiding it from Mama and Amaka. But at night, he returned to his notebook, pouring his rage and confusion onto the leaves. One day, he wrote, "Do not know if I am a writer or a weapon, but I know that I bleed either way." He was no longer a child. He was no longer innocent. He was something else now. A boy holding two futures, one in a gun, one in a story. One morning, Mama collapsed. Her breath came in gasps. There was no medicine, no doctor, just herbs and prayer. Obinna sat beside her, holding her fragile hands. She opened her eyes once. "My son, what have you become?" He looked away. She placed something in his palm. It was a photo of their family from 3 years ago, before the war, before the fire. "Remember who you were." That night, she died. No shouts, no cries, just a silent, bitter exit. Obinna didn't cry, but in his notebook he wrote, "The woman who gave me life has left, but she left me something greater, memory." At dawn, Nigerian fighter jets sliced the sky like knives. 1, 2, 3 bombs fell. The Biafran camp exploded in fire and screams, tents ripped apart, children ran in circles, mothers screamed names into smoke. Obinna grabbed Amaka and ran. They didn't look back. They didn't. Bury Mama. There was no time. The world had ended, again. They ran for hours, through bush, through swamps, through gunfire. They found shelter in an abandoned classroom near the border. The chalkboard still read, "Today's lesson, nouns and pronouns." Obinna opened his notebook. The pages were soaked, some torn, but he wrote and wrote and wrote, until the rain stopped, until the moon returned, until the ache in his chest turned into words. The war didn't end with a bang. It ended with silence. Not the peaceful silence of victory, but the heavy silence of too much death, of too many graves without names. Obinna sat under the shell of a broken tree outside the abandoned schoolroom near the Cameroon border. His notebook rested on his lap, pages torn and rain-stained. Amaka lay beside him, asleep but thin. So thin, her ribs danced with each breath like xylophone keys. He had no more food, no more family, only words. But those words were still burning. One evening, Corporal Madhu found them again. "You survived," he said, surprised. Obinna didn't reply. He was staring at a blank page, a charcoal stick in his hand. Madhu sat down beside him, his uniform stained with old blood and dust. "Come back with me. We're regrouping. We have rifles now. Real ones, not wood. We can still fight." Obinna turned. "For what?" Madhu's eyes narrowed. "For Biafra. For freedom." Obinna looked down at his sister's small hand clutched in his own. He remembered Mama's words. "Remember who you were." Then he looked at his notebook. "No," Obinna said quietly. "I won't fight with guns anymore. I'll fight with this." He held up the notebook. Madhu laughed. Words won't stop bullets. Obinna's eyes burned. No, but they can outlive them. A week later, a Red Cross team arrived. They were evacuating survivors. Obinna and Amaka were placed on a truck, alongside broken children and tired mothers. Most were silent. Some prayed. A few wept. Obinna wrote as the wheels turned through the ruins of villages and smoke-ridden forests. He wrote about hunger, about the ache of an empty plate. He wrote about loss, about Mama's final breath. He wrote about Amaka's quiet strength. He wrote about boys who became bullets and girls who became ghosts. He wrote the truth. He wrote so the world would never forget. In a Red Cross camp near Enugu, a tall white man with a fedora approached him. "I've been told about you," the man said, kneeling beside Obinna. "A boy who writes the war." Obinna said nothing. The man handed him a typewriter, old, rusted, but beautiful. "I'm a journalist," the man said, "but your words are stronger than mine." He gave Obinna his notebook, now typed and bound. The title read, "The Biafran Boy, a Child's Cry During Nigeria's Deadliest War." Obinna, Naji Obinna, stared at it, then looked at the man. "Let the world read it," the man said, and so they did. Years passed. The war ended, but Obinna's story spread, first through the Red Cross, then across borders, then to Europe, America, Asia. His notebook, raw, bleeding, truthful, was translated into 19 languages. Schoolchildren read it in history classes. Human rights groups cited it in UN meetings. And Obinna? He grew, he studied, he never picked up a gun again. But he never stopped writing. 20 years later, Obinna returned to the same school building where he had first taken shelter. It was repaired now, painted, filled with children. He stood in front of the chalkboard. He was no longer a boy. He was a man with silver hair, deep eyes, and a voice that carried nations. On the board he wrote, "Words can outlive bullets. Stories can break silence. A child's cry is the sound of history." The students clapped. Some cried. Amaka, now a teacher herself, stood at the back. Wiping a tear, Obinna smiled. He had won, not with a gun, but with a cry. A child's cry that changed everything.